Good evening. Thank you for joining us for another Tuesday Town Hall with Monique Smith, candidate for Ohio State Representative. I'm Carolyn Kane. I'm your moderator for tonight. We are continuing the discussions from last week where we were focusing on jobs in the economy. Still really important. We're going to keep talking about that. But tonight we have a special guest from the North Shore AFL-CIO Federation of Labor, Dan OMalley. Dan is a Cleveland native and is a campaigns director there, and he works on community outreach, workplace organizing, and advocates for public policy to benefit working families. He's also a Lakewood resident and the president of City Council. So welcome, Dan. We are so happy to have you here tonight.
I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
And of course, Monique Smith, candidate for Ohio House District 16, is our host for this evening's discussion. She's bringing her unique background in business, community service, and her experience as an elected city official as well. Welcome, Monique.
Thanks, Carolyn. I'm excited to be doing this with Dan. Thanks, Dan, for doing this.
All right, Absolutely. And so I'm just going to turn it over to you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Well, I am so happy to have Dan OMalley here because Dan is an all-around great person and a leader in the city of Lakewood, where, as Carolyn pointed out, he is the president of City Council, and I was very proud to have served there. Unfortunately, not at the same time as Dan, but the reason I always mention my service there, even though it's not in the current district where I'm running, is because it was such an excellent training ground for understanding the mechanics of government and how local government connects with state policy and state budgets. And I always tell people that when I was on council, I served from 2010 to 2014, and we were dealing with the effects of the Great Recession. So tax revenue was down because unfortunately, folks had lost jobs and foreclosures were up. And, you know, Lakewood is an inner ring suburb where I always say we were hanging on by our fingernails at that time, trying to be as disciplined as we could in terms of our fiscal choices. And I thought, you know, we were doing an outstanding and very responsible job, making sure that we were still providing social services as much as we could, but, you know, trying to tighten our belts and just survive a really bad economic time. And, you know, that is also when we had a governor who cut local government funds, which are something that we all pay into in our local communities. And it's supposed to come back to our communities to help us fund some critical core services. Those have not been 100% restored ever since they were cut. And so all those things make it really hard for us to do what we need to do to have a great quality of life here in our local communities. And so, Dan, I have the utmost respect for people who are serving at the local level and dealing with really big issues for sometimes really small pay, Dan. But you do it because you care and you're a good citizen and it's your turn to serve. And I really admire it and appreciate it. And I think everybody should. And so, Dan, I want to tell everyone a little bit more about your background before we get started. You are a native of Cleveland. Let's see. And before joining the North Shore Federation of Labor, you were for 8 years the state director of Working America, the AFL-CIO's community affiliate. You're a graduate of John Carroll over there on the east side. And now as campaigns director for AFL, your work involves community outreach, workplace organizing, and advocating for public policy that benefits working families. And you're living in the Gold Coast neighborhood of Lakewood and serving on City Council. So you're just really, really busy and doing a lot of work for the public good.
And you know, Monique, a native of Cleveland, but more specifically a native of Fairview Park in House District 16. So I grew up on Macbeth Avenue off West 220th Street, and I'm so excited about the possibility of you representing my hometown.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love that connection. That's really, you don't, it's funny, like Lakewood is a place where so many people on the west side have lived in Lakewood for at least 1 year before living in another part of the west side. But I don't get those same connections all the time with Fairview. So I'm so glad that we have that connection. Dan, I want to just go ahead and get started. And I have some notes here. And I would like to start with having you just explain what AFL-CIO is and what the North Shore chapter does and what your role is.
Well, the AFL-CIO is it's more than a century-old organization, and it's an umbrella organization really for labor unions. So we have members within the AFL-CIO unions that are affiliated with us that are as diverse as the economy itself. So we've got affiliate unions that are in the building and construction trades, that are in the manufacturing sector, public education sector, civil servants, from all the way to, the musicians at the Cleveland Orchestra and the Cleveland Browns players. It's a very, very diverse group of workers, but when you sort of look at that whole picture, you realize that we are all workers, and the AFL-CIO is a home for everyone. Within in the North Shore, AFL-CIO is simply the local chapter, in the sense that we represent all affiliate unions that are joined with us in Cuyahoga, Lake, and Geauga counties.
Gotcha. And so Dan, if you don't mind, I know that I just covered a little bit of this in your bio, but can you tell me what your role is and what advocacy looks like through AFL-CIO?
Sure. Well, I talk about this, when a legendary labor leader once said that there's a direct relationship between the ballot box and the bread box. And, what we fight for and win at the bargaining table can easily be taken away in city halls and in state legislatures all across the country. And so it's important for us to make sure that the position of workers is heard, and heard loud and clear, both ranging from school boards to city councils, all the way to state legislatures and Congress and the White House. We think about so many corporations, trade organizations, even nonprofit organizations that have lobbyists, that have people whose job it is to make sure that their voice and their position is understood. Well, working people should have the same rights. And so it's my job at the local level to make sure that the voices of our members are heard.
And so, so you make a lot of trips to Columbus and talk to legislators and talk about policy and keep an eye on laws that are going to be passed. What are some of the priorities now of the AFL-CIO in Ohio, or some of the concerns?
Well, I feel like in a state like Ohio, we are always sort of on defense, in the sense that, we have a lot of people down there who are not necessarily our friends, but we've also got a number of folks who certainly are. And, we are sort of an island in a sea of right to work when you look at other states like Indiana and Michigan and Kentucky now. And, we are always looking at some big threats like that as on the horizon. And we, however, are also making sure that when you look, whether here at City Hall and in the state legislature, and I see, of course, your colleagues in the State House and the State Senate who represent us here in Northeast Ohio frequently, and making sure that, when it comes time to budget legislation or transportation legislation and things like that, that the rights and interests of workers are being represented. So those things are always happening. Those are things that happen on a cyclical basis, but then of course we look at things that come up on a more acute basis, like right to work, that we're always vigilant in making sure that doesn't happen.
And when you're making the case to the public and to legislators, tell me what that, tell me what are some of the main points that we all need to be keeping in mind in terms of keeping, having respect for the value that workers bring to the table, and what that should look like in terms of compensation and benefits and protections and things like that.
Yeah, well, one thing that I always say when it comes to making sure that working people have that the economy works for them too, is that we're talking about your neighbors, the people who live on your street, people who are in your own family, maybe even you yourself in your own household. And so, when the person next door isn't getting a raise, that's a household that's less likely to be keeping up their house, less likely to be able to pay their property tax bill, less likely to be able to contribute to your school system. And so it's really in everybody's interest to make sure that workers are enjoying their fair share of the economy. So that's something that I always stress. For workers, we have unions really are about making sure that ordinary everyday people are, again, being able to enjoy their fair share of our economy, prospering, having safe working conditions, and basic benefits like healthcare and retirement security. And so we're fighting for that every day at the bargaining table with our employers, but we also have to make sure that that case is made in the halls of government too.
Mm-hmm. And, last summer, we all saw in the national news that UAW workers went on strike at GM. And, I don't come from a union background and I don't come from a union family. And to be honest, I wish I had come from a family of that background, because I think I might have had a more comfortable upbringing with really great benefits and some protections and stability that we needed in my family, where my sister and I were raised by my mom by herself. And, I know some other folks, and when I get to know their life story, same situation, single parent, 2 kids, but mom was a postal worker. And mom had benefits and mom had fair pay, and they had a house of their own to live in. And we had housing instability in my family. And my mom was working full time her whole life with us. Certainly doing everything she could, and so now that I have more life experience, I see, how this makes such a difference for a whole family and for then by extension, a whole community. But because I didn't grow up in a union background, it's not native to me to know all the benefits of the labor movement. And so I had to do some studying last summer to understand, what is fair? Were GM workers asking for what was fair, or were they being unreasonable? I really came to it with a totally blank slate. And when I looked at the information showing that GM was making record profits in the, I don't know if it was the billions or the millions, but plenty having, and we celebrate that, right? We want American companies to be successful and do well and thrive. But it was the first time I really understood, really in crystal clear terms, that there was probably plenty for GM to share in terms of the benefits of its success with its workers. And whether that meant healthcare protections and insurance, or, pay, or ensuring that their GM is not using a backdoor avenue to having workers without providing benefits by having these long-term temps that are there for years and years and should really be considered employees. It was a great learning experience for me to be able to see what the labor movement fights for and what the value is. And I don't know, I just wonder if you can share a little more insight on that, and maybe even more examples of why this matters, why this is so important.
Yeah, I mean, I did grow up in a union household, and actually UAW was the first union that my family belonged to. My grandfather immigrated to this country in the late 1940s. He had a 6th grade education, was an immigrant who, had a lot of work ethic, but somebody that
Dan,
you wouldn't necessarily.
I'm guessing he came from Ireland with your last name. Oh, I lost you for a second there. You froze.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, he did. Sorry, yes, he came from Ireland. But he was able to work 40 hours a week and make a living, a decent living. He didn't get rich by any stretch of the imagination, but because he worked hard, and belonged to a union, he was able to secure enough to provide for his 7 children. He was a single father eventually, and also was able to have a secure retirement. And I think about, that job that my grandfather did on that factory floor, done for pennies a day. Somebody who wouldn't have had any dignity at work, who would have been working 80 hours a week, 7 days a week with no safety protections, no retirement security to speak of. And the difference between those two realities was that we had a labor movement born in this country. But I would say to people who even people who didn't ever belong to a union and who really don't have much of an understanding, the auto workers at the Honda plant in Marysville, Ohio, people bring this up all the time as an argument that, well, they're making really good money too, and they don't have a union. Well, it's because those union auto factories have really raised the industry standard for auto workers, to say nothing of the fact that the threat, for lack of a better term, of unionization is serving as an incentive for Honda to keep those workers as happy as possible. And so, unions really do benefit everybody, whether you actually belong to one or not. And even in a less tangential way, again, my grandfather, he did very well for somebody who, again, had very little formal education, was a very smart guy, but left Ireland at a young age. And he was able to maintain, raise his children, and again, have a secure retirement. So it's something that I think we need to keep in mind when we hear about attacks on unions. It's really an attack on all of us when you think about it.
Mm-hmm. Can you also make that comparison to white collar work and how there are connections there?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine. I won't mention the company, but it's a unionized company. However, he is management, and he's a supervisor. And I was talking to him, and I said, "Oh, how do you get along with the union?" He said, "Oh, it's okay." He said, there's times when we're adversarial, but we come at each other with a mutual understanding of our positions. He said, "But I'll tell you what, I'm really glad they're there." And I said, "Really?" I said, I'm glad to hear that." He goes, "Yep." He said, "Every 2 years when the union contract gets negotiated and they get their 3% pay, I know that a memo is coming a month later saying that my pay is going up 3% too." And so, it's really about, again, sort of raising that floor and raising standards for all of us. My union in particular, I am actually a member of the Office and Professional Employees Union, so it's sort of a white collar union. People in white collar industries, I'm sure even more today than ever before, really have an incentive and a need to be protected in the workplace. We see white collar workers really being taken advantage of. We get calls all the time into our office asking for connections as to how white collar workers can unionize. People in the healthcare field, folks who work in the gig economy. And so we really see that need. And I think really, unless you're at the very, 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 very top, you have had an experience in your life where you really wish that you had more rights on the job, or at least more of a voice in your workplace. And so, that doesn't stop with factory workers and folks in the building or construction trades. It really is about everybody who works. We think about some of the fights that we've had politically in the last few years, whether that ranges from, you think about Lilly Ledbetter, you think about the Hobby Lobby case, think about the Employment and Non-Discrimination Act at the federal level and the Fairness Act here at the state level, with which Nikki Antonio introduced. what all these things have in common is they're about how people are treated at work. And so, I think everybody, whether you are a blue collar worker, a white collar worker, or somewhere outside or in between, you deserve a voice on the job.
And I have one more question about that for people, again, who come to this kind of, without a lot of background. I've heard perceptions that unions can hurt business in the United States. I want to hear what you have to say about that. Or I guess I mean the competitiveness or the viability of business. And I'll just say this, because you're frozen for a minute. What I do know is that I don't want our country to be part of a race to the bottom. I don't want our country to lead a race to the bottom in terms of benefits and working conditions and pay and that sort of thing. So that's what I know about it, but tell me what else we should keep in mind.
Well, I would say that unions are actually very good for businesses and for our economy as a whole. I mean, when you think about some of the days where we had really high unionization rates in this country, in the 1950s and 60s, unions accounted for a third of the entire workforce was unionized. I don't look back on those days. Those days are what folks on the this
you're a little bit frozen, but
I'm guessing the good old days, and I don't want to discount. Okay, I don't want to discount the fact that those days weren't great for a lot of people. However, when unions are able to negotiate on behalf of their members and reach out and insist that working people are able to enjoy their fair share of what they help to create. Again, none of our members in the unions are millionaires. Maybe some of those Browns players. But none of us are getting their fair share. And by the way, what do you think they're doing with that money? They're not socking it into, some Cayman Island account where it's just, not going to be seen or touched forever. That money's going into buying cars, into shopping at stores and in restaurants, and so many other businesses. So they really are good for businesses. They're good for the economy. I would say even for the businesses where those workers are being unionized, I can tell you, having worked in some of those companies and organizations, it really does provide a uniformity and an understanding. The most productive rolled steel mill in the entire world, by the way, most productive rolled steel mill in the entire world is ArcelorMittal here in Cleveland, Ohio. Those workers are unionized almost wall to wall. And so, they certainly haven't been hurting on productivity and any of the other benchmarks that we look to when we're thinking about what makes a business successful. And so, I would push back on that a great deal. I really do think that unions make sure that we have a level playing field, that we have due process for workers, and that we make sure, again, that everybody is able to enjoy their share of what they're helping to create.
And so here in Ohio, is there any legislation or policy that's pending or has recently been passed that really catches your attention when it comes to these issues? Anything immediately that you're keeping an eye on? You've talked about in the past how right to work pops up over and over again. Maybe we should quickly, first of all, just define right to work. Can you do that for us, Dan?
Sure. Well, right to work is really a political attack. It really has nothing to do with rights or weaken unions. And the proof is in the pudding. If you look at states where they have so-called right to work laws, the workers make less money, They have less protections on the job. Their workplace fatalities, deaths on the job are significantly higher. They retire at a later age. I mean, just every benchmark you would want to look at, it's worse for workers. So when they call it right to work, that's really not what it is. So that is something that is always a threat. It gets introduced every time. We're very fortunate in this state to have and a lot of my counterparts down in Columbus have really has so far been kept on the other side of the wall. But it's always something that's being threatened, and it can come up in any number of ways. But we have a again, the budget comes up on a regular basis. Transportation, workers' compensation bills that come up. So these are things that are, and of course, education bills that are always being pushed. Public education is in just such, is always under attack here at the state, in the state. We have a shameful for-profit education system in the state of Ohio. It has made us the laughingstock of the country. That absolutely has to be fixed. I know that my sisters and brothers in the teachers union would certainly agree with that. And, we really need champions like you down in Columbus, Monique, to fight for public schools. You've got some of the best public school districts in the entire state of Ohio are nested within House District 16. Mm-hmm. And I think making sure that the voices of those teachers, rather than the people who are trying to make money off those kids, are heard loud and clear down there is going to be really important.
Right. I mean, now more than ever, as we think about the safety of teachers and staff, as we think about the safety of children, I am so grateful for the work that teachers do, and I understand better than ever, why we need to sort of have some guardrails on what we ask of teachers and workers. I mean, for example, I did not realize that because our schools are so underfunded, many schools cut their custodial staff years ago. What does that mean in a time of COVID? That means that if teachers are expected to have better sanitation and cleaning standards, they're doing it themselves. Yeah. This is while they're.
We had a school district a couple of years ago who part of one of the things that they were proposing in negotiation was that all the people who worked in the lunchroom basically be laid off, and that the teachers would instead use the free period that they were using to tutor kids and give them extra help, that they instead go and double as lunchroom supervisors. It's crazy.
Wow. So yeah. Folks who went to school earned their master's degree so that they could understand the best teaching methods wouldn't be used in the most effective way. I mean, that's really operational mismanagement, right? We should be using our resources in the way that they can make the greatest impact. I've heard about so many counselors who really don't get a chance necessarily to provide mental health and social work services as much as they'd like to, because they're doing so much around teaching to the test and helping kids to survive excessive testing circumstances. This is in a time when, people like my opponent, try to say that when it comes to safety in schools, when it comes to gun safety, when it comes to the terrible news in the past about school shootings, that all we need is more mental health counselors at schools, and that'll solve it. And my opponent even presented some legislation completely focused on mental health in response to the Dayton shooting that happened just over a year ago. But it's bogus legislation, and there's no real commitment to using these resources in our schools in the right way to begin with. So we can't, have people in these roles where they're already underutilized or utilized the wrong way, and then pretend that the system is working as it is, and we can just, solve all of our problems by keeping it the way it is. Actually, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
No, go ahead.
So I mean, we're not truly committed to providing excellent education for our children in the state of Ohio. If we were, we wouldn't leave our schools underfunded, and we wouldn't continue to allow an unconstitutional funding formula that overburdens our communities by over relying on property taxes. And that's not just something that hurts communities with lower property value. Even here in my district, where there are communities and neighborhoods with quite high property value, there is going to be tax levy fatigue. There already is. The way that we fund our schools cannot continue the way it is when we're also diverting some of those funds into ineffective, for-profit, charter schools in some cases that are not held to the same standards. So we just have overall mismanagement and not a great use of our resources. Yeah. Of course, there are some, I just want to give a shout out to, I have actually crossed paths with a couple of really truly committed charter school, leaders who really truly care about providing an innovative setting where they can try new things and where students can thrive. But I want to say this in terms of the way that we do funding and why it's inefficient and ineffective in Ohio. My brother-in-law is in town right now from California. His kids are in the Los Angeles Unified School District. One of his sons was just admitted to what they call, I think, an innovative charter school within the public school system. That is possible. So my point is, we can have choice, we can have creativity, we can have innovation, but we don't have to do it in such an ineffective and inefficient way in terms of multiple streams of funding going in multiple directions like we do in Ohio. Ohio doesn't do a good enough job when it comes to education, doesn't do a good enough job at looking at other models that work in other places to achieve what we want to achieve in a more effective and efficient way. So we have a broken funding formula and an unconstitutional funding system that needs to be changed.
Yeah, I think people are surprised to learn that we are actually not totally against charter schools. We are actually in favor of charter schools that succeed and that have, and where the teachers have a voice. We actually had a number of schools in the last few years where the teachers actually joined the American Federation of Teachers, Ohio Federation of Teachers, and those are all very successful schools. We are certainly against for-profit charters, and we're of course very much against failing charter schools. But the extent to which that charter schools exist and are succeeding, we want to make sure that the teachers there have a voice, and the students and everybody and the parents and everybody are all the better for it. Somebody who I know is a friend of yours, as she is a friend of mine, Gabby Jackson, who was one of the first teachers to join AFT when she was a teacher at a charter school here in Cleveland.
I was just thinking of her, and that's a perfect example of an extremely committed, talented, creative, brilliant person who we want to keep in our education system. We've lost her temporarily to the state of Massachusetts, but I plan to get her back.
Temporarily.
Right. But that covers, I think, a lot of ground, Dan. If it's okay with you, I'd love to take some questions if there are any in the chat that Carolyn is seeing right now. Is that okay with you, Dan?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we do have a question, and I also want to thank everybody who's been commenting, and we've had some shout outs and waves out there. So, but we have a question. Jeff would like to know, what can union members do to help get Monique elected this fall?
Go ahead.
You go ahead.
Well, first of all, one thing that's just really important to me is that you help to share my name so that people know that I'm running. a huge advantage that any incumbent has, no matter their party, no matter whether they're a good representative or a bad representative, is they have the huge advantage of just simple name recognition. And sometimes voters like to vote with a name that looks familiar and comfortable to them. So I just need people to know, first of all, that I'm running, and that someone like you and someone from your community that stands up for labor and working families approves of a candidate like me. That's a first step that's extremely important. Dan, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, we actually have pretty high union density in House District 16. At North District, we actually have a significant number of union households. I would certainly direct any of our members to your campaign, but also know that we're going to be working hard from our office to make sure that our members know which candidate is standing up for working families and who's going to stand up for them in Columbus. And that's certainly you, Monique. And we're going to, it's a little different this year because we're not knocking on doors in a traditional way from the AFL-CIO. We're not, huddling 100 people into a room for a big phone bank, but we're being as creative as we can to make sure that not only are we getting word out, but that union members have the opportunity to get involved in the campaign. So stay tuned, but we're gonna be in touch, and we already have been, but we're gonna continue to be in touch with our members of your district about this and other races that people may have heard about this year. So.
On that point, Carolyn, I just want to say, I did not grow up in a union family, but I feel like I'm part of the family now when you say that, and that feels really good.
Yeah.
And I get that sense of feeling like what that support is like, and I really appreciate it. And I just want to say one other thing. My husband, who is a tech worker, when he was first starting out in his adult career life, he was down in Columbus and wasn't so sure about what he wanted to major in, what he was doing in college. And he ended up becoming a union member through employment at AT&T. And that was an incredible, unexpectedly fabulous way for him to start off on this tech path that has been so great for him and for our family. He became a member of Communication Workers of America, CWA. Through that that work opportunity, he received great pay, great benefits, and was able to get some access to some training and education, which helped him to start learning what he needed to take some further steps in tech. And it changed his whole career path. And so we are really grateful for the connection to CWA. And I guess I appreciate.
You asked me earlier. Yeah,
What's
you
that?
asked me earlier about unions. You asked me earlier about unions having a negative effect on business. AT&T is actually a company that is pretty well unionized across the board. And last I checked, they're doing extremely well. So just another example of that. But CWA is a great union, one of our largest affiliates at North Shore, and I'm so glad to hear that. I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's funny because we sometimes forget in our own household, but then when I really stopped to think back at one of the opportunities that I really think changed my husband's life and our family's life, I would say that is it. So we should definitely be reminding ourselves and everyone else about that more often. So Carolyn, I took us off course for a minute there. Do you have any questions? Do you have shout outs? Do you have anything for us there in the chat?
No more questions in the chat. I do just want to add that anybody who is watching this video who has not liked Monique's page on Facebook already, that's a great way to support her. So you will get all the announcements that are coming from her campaign and great videos like this, and you can join more events. So definitely like and follow Monique on Facebook, and make your plan for voting now in November. If you want to request that mail-in ballot, absentee ballot, you can go to www.443vote.com in Cuyahoga County, and you can request that absentee or mail-in ballot. And it's just really important to know how you're going to cast your vote in November, because it's so important from the local level all the way up to the federal level right now to be able to cast your vote. So thank you, Dan, for joining us. And thank you, Monique, for hosting tonight.
Great.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I'll just say one last thing to Jeff in regard to your question. We will need volunteers very soon. We will not be knocking on doors and having conversations at the door with voters, but we will be dropping off a piece of literature that we hang on their doorknob, and we will have thousands of those pieces of literature. And it would be a huge help if you and your friends could each take one of those packets and spend an afternoon or a morning on a weekend walking a neighborhood and leaving those little door hangers on people's doors. That's another way to get the word out about this campaign and about our opportunity to flip this district and really get someone who cares about working families. I have skin in the game with my own family in the district to raise, and I've got hopefully many more years where the quality of life in this district is going to affect me and my family. And so I've got a lot to fight for, and really would appreciate all of your support along the way. And I hope I have the opportunity to fight for you.
And I just noticed Jeff's question in the chat. He's another fine CWA member who lives in your district. So
that Jeff. I've met that Jeff. All right.
That Jeff. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you again for a great conversation tonight. And I learned a lot. So I appreciate you joining us, Dan. And as always, I appreciate Monique. So thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.